No more fiendish punishment could be devised, were such a thing physically possible, than that one should be turned loose in society and remain absolutely unnoticed by all the members thereof. William James wrote those words in Principles of Psychology, published in 1890, and they carry the weight of a man who understood something essential about human need, not from theory alone but from the inside. James knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to be invisible, to have the substance of one's inner life go unrecognized. And he believed this experience was not merely unpleasant. It was psychologically catastrophic. The passage appears in his famous analysis of the social self. His argument that the self is not a fixed, private entity but a relational one, constituted in significant part by how we are perceived and treated by others. We carry, James argued, as many social selves as there are individuals who recognize us. We are different versions of ourselves with our parents, our colleagues, our intimate friends, our strangers on the street. None of these versions is more real than the others. Together they form the complex, context-dependent being that we actually are. But among all these relational selves, there is one that James treated with particular gravity, the self that exists in the presence of intimate recognition. Not fame, not status, not the broad social approval of the crowd, but the particular experience of being truly known by another person. Seen not in part, not from a flattering angle, not in the role we are performing, but in something closer to fullness. James believed this experience was one of the deepest needs in human nature, and its absence one of the most corrosive forms of deprivation. Why? Because self-knowledge itself is, in James's psychology, partly a social achievement. We come to know ourselves through the mirror of other minds. The person who has never been genuinely seen by another is not fully known even to themselves, not because the inner life is not real, but because self-understanding is deepened and clarified by the experience of recognition. When someone truly sees you, when they grasp not just what you do but who you are, not just your surface but something of your depth, you become more legible to yourself. The experience of being known is simultaneously an experience of self-discovery. This is why friendship, for James, was not a luxury but a psychological necessity. Not the functional friendships of convenience, in which people are useful to each other but not particularly interested in each other, though James valued those too. He was talking about the friendship in which two people have genuinely shown themselves to each other, have been willing to be seen without the usual protective layers of performance, and have survived that exposure with the relationship intact. This kind of friendship is rare, James knew. It requires courage and time and a willingness to bear the vulnerability of exposure. But it is worth more, he believed, than almost anything else a person can have. He was also attentive to the ways in which recognition can go wrong, can become a trap rather than a gift. The approval of others, when it becomes the primary source of self-esteem, turns intimacy into a kind of constant audition. The person who is always performing for the approval of others has not achieved genuine intimacy. They have achieved a more sophisticated form of loneliness. Genuine intimacy requires the willingness to risk disapproval, to show the parts of oneself that might not be approved of, and to trust that the recognition offered will survive that revelation. James wrote, in his personal letters, with remarkable candor about his own experience of friendship and its significance to him. His correspondences with Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., with Charles Peirce, with his sister Alice, these were not merely intellectual exchanges. They were exercises in mutual recognition, relationships in which something of the real person was at stake. James treasured them precisely because they offered what public life, for all its rewards, could not, the experience of being known rather than merely noticed. The modern resonance of all this is almost painful in its precision. We live in an era of unprecedented social connectivity and unprecedented loneliness. The average person has more contacts, more followers, more platforms for self-expression than any human being in history, and yet reported rates of loneliness and social isolation have been rising steadily for decades. James's framework helps us understand why. What is missing in hyperconnected modern life is not contact but recognition. The difference between having many acquaintances and having someone who truly knows you is not a difference of degree. It is a difference of kind. James would have understood this immediately. He knew that recognition cannot be manufactured at scale, cannot be distributed across 1,000 shallow connections. It requires depth, time, attention, and the willingness to be genuinely seen, which means the willingness to be genuinely vulnerable. A culture that tries to substitute quantity of contact for quality of recognition will find, as ours is finding, that the hunger does not go away. It deepens. What James ultimately offers on intimacy is not a program or a technique but a reminder of what we are actually hungry for. Not to be liked or admired, but to be known, imperfectly, partially, impermanently, but genuinely. That hunger is as old as the species, and it will not be satisfied by anything less than what it is actually asking for. Subscribe to The Psychology of William James to explore more of his timeless ideas.